OK，但係頭先咧好快咁樣講咗，所以咧我而家想揾多少少時間講下我哋有兩個嘅 research studies，我哋有兩個研究項目咧喺我哋香港中文大學係進行緊嘅。不過呢啲係可以上網嘅 study 嘅，所以咧上網嘅研究，所以咧澳門嘅家長咧都可以參與嘅。咁呢個第一個研究咧就係關於 K3 即係幼稚園高班啦，到小三嘅學生咧。咁我哋係設計咗有啲係網上嘅語言嘅遊戲咧，希望透過一啲網上嘅語言遊戲咧，可以促進到咧佢哋嘅語言發展嘅。咁呢個研究咧就係包括我哋會有語言治療師喺網上做一個評估啦，然之後咧就有啲遊戲俾佢哋玩啦，咁跟住咧係再做一個評估嘅。咁咧如果你哋有興趣咧，可以照呢個 QR code 啦，咁照咗呢個 QR code 之後咧就可以上網登記就得啦。咁呢個係語言遊戲 K3 高班到小三嘅小朋友，係用廣東話學廣東話為母語嘅小朋友嘅。咁第二個研究咧，好多人都問呢個問題。頭先就係咧，係關於我哋有一個評估網上嘅評估嘅。咁咧，呢個係一個問卷嘅形式去評估你小朋友嗰個語言發展嘅。咁就係俾8至32個大嘅家長啦，嘅小朋友，如果個家長係填寫呢個嘅問卷嘅，咁你係照呢個 QR code 啦。咁咧個 activation code 咧，你要去輸入嗰個啟動嗰個密碼嘅，就係 BMI 22就係嗰個啟動嗰個密碼。咁你打咗入去，跟住有一啲問題關於問你咧，然之後咧就係有一啲詞彙咧係問下你個小朋友識唔識嘅。你做完到最後咧，我哋會俾一個分你嘅，咁等你大約知道咧你個小朋友咧其實而家語言發展去到咩地步。我哋呢個評估咧，呢個嘅研究項目咧，其實係想改良咧而家我哋現有嘅工具。我哋俾你嘅分咧係而家現有工具係俾你嘅分嘅，但係我哋都係做緊一個研究係想改良呢個咁嘅測試嘅，咁希望大家咧都係參與。咁最後咧如果你哋想知道多啲關於我哋大陸語言諮研究所嘅唔同嘅資訊啊，我哋嘅講座啊，我哋嘅研究項目咧，就請你咧就係加入我哋嘅 Facebook follow 我哋，咁咧你就會收到我哋唔同嘅資訊㗎。And now I'm going to introduce our final speaker for today, Professor Urs Maurer, our very own Professor Urs Maurer. He is associate professor in the psychology department of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. His research focuses on cognitive and neural aspects of spoken and written language processing. He's particularly interested in reading acquisition, dyslexia, and second language learning. One goal of his work is to use neural markers of language processing to inform screening and intervention practices for dyslexia. His research involves behavioral and functional neuroimaging techniques such as EEG and fMRI. He received his PhD at the University of Zurich in Switzerland. He then pursued postdoctoral studies at the University of Zurich and at the Weill Medical College of Cornell University in New York City. Before joining the Chinese University, he was an assistant professor at the University of Zurich, funded through the Swiss National Science Foundation's prestigious research professor scheme. So without further ado, Urs.
Yes, thank you very much, Patrick. Yeah, so I'm really glad that I can build up on the talks by James and Kevin. So, but I must admit I haven't understood much from Kevin's talk because I do not speak Cantonese, but I saw a few terms that I will also touch on. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about kind of two studies that we did with an intervention study for reading that we did in Hong Kong. So I've been doing research in reading for over 20 years, and something that I still find striking is how big the differences are in reading ability in children at the beginning of learning to read. So these are data from my previous position in Zurich, where we looked at children at the end of first grade. So in Switzerland, children start learning in first grade. So they had learned to read for 1 year. And here what we can see are how many words per minute they read correctly. So in one case, words presented as a list, and in the other case, words were presented as a text, and they are highly correlated. But the point that I wanna highlight here that there is really this big difference. So some children are reading like more than 80 or 100 words per minute after 1 year of learning to read. and other children, they read less than 20 or even 10 words per minute. And so these children at the lower end, they are probably dyslexic. And now this is a slide that I can kind of go through more quickly now that James already has also introduced that, like, dyslexia is a disorder of learning to read. If children have kind of normal intelligence and also educational opportunities, it's quite frequent. Around 5 to 10% of all children at school, they are having dyslexia. And also there is a familial risk. So if a parent or a mother of a child has dyslexia, then the risk is around 40 to 60% that the child also will develop dyslexia. This is not that important now for what I'm presenting today, but it's kind of relevant for the 2 studies that I mentioned at the very end of my talk. And the core deficit, and this is kind of now based on alphabetic languages, and James has talked about that in the beginning. So in alphabetic languages, it's considered that children with dyslexia have a deficit in phonological processing, or as James said, also in the mapping between phonology and orthography or writing. And also there is a deficit in rapid automatized naming. I'll talk about the differences afterwards in Chinese, and Kevin has already also touched on that. So the consequence of these deficits are that children make errors when they are reading and writing, or they are just slow in reading and writing. And I mean, that's the core symptom of dyslexia in whatever language we look at. So what is special about Chinese writing? And to illustrate that, I wanted to just select 2 texts, and I selected something from a very recent event. So from the Oscar that Michelle Yeoh has received, I think the last week. And so this is just from the same web page. It's not the same text, but one web page was in English and the other one in Chinese. But even if it's not the same content, I think we can still use it to look at the differences between Chinese and English. So one of the most obvious differences is that in Chinese, we do not have word boundaries. So we just see characters, and we need to figure out ourselves where a word starts and where a word ends, because a word can have more than one character. And another obvious or important thing is that in Chinese, we are not writing the speech sounds like as we do in English. So we use letters or letter groups to write speech sounds. So what we do in Chinese, we write an entire syllable with a character. But in Chinese, also what's special is that the character is not just mapping on a syllable, but also the syllable is also a morpheme. And Kevin has talked about that. So a morpheme has some meaning. Then something special in Chinese is that there are just a large number of characters that children have to learn. So one estimation is like children have to learn about 3,000 to 4,000 characters at Hong Kong schools so that they can learn to read. And also, if we look at a character itself, it's visually complex. It's more complex than a letter in an alphabetic language. And also, what is special in Chinese is that a character, most Chinese characters are composed of radicals. Like we have semantic radical and a phonetic radical. The semantic radical gives some indication about the meaning, and the phonetic radical some indication about the pronunciation. Like here, the character ma. I apologize if I don't pronounce it correctly. So the pronunciation is indicated by the radical on the right-hand side for horse, ma, and the radical on the left-hand left-hand side is a semantic radical, and it indicates it has something to do with a woman or a female. Yeah, so that's kind of one principle in Chinese. But and another important thing is that characters are not words. So some characters are words, but most words are actually combining 2 or even 3 characters. So we are kind of building compound word. We are compounding the characters into larger units, the words. And because of these properties, so and that's kind of also what Kevin already mentioned. So it's not just phonological awareness that is important, but also morphological awareness and orthographic awareness. Kevin also mentioned additional aspects about fast retrieval. I think that's related to the rapid automatized naming that I mentioned on the previous slide, and working memory. But so phonological awareness, that is related to the mapping. So we're still, Chinese writing is still a writing system that maps spoken language to written language. So we still map syllables to characters. So there is still phonology involved. Also, the phonetic radicals have some relation to phonological skills. And morphological awareness is important because a character is not just a syllable, but also a morpheme. And also we have the semantic radicals that we can also say that has some relation to morphological processing. And the principle of combining syllables or characters into words is also kind of a way of processing the morphology of the characters. And orthographic awareness is important because we have this large number of characters that children need to learn, and because the characters are visually complex. And also the radicals, there are some just orthographic principles, how radicals are combined. And children also can learn these regularities. So, yeah, so what we see here is that the cognitive skills that underlie Chinese are more diverse than what we have seen in alphabetic languages. So now we wanted to develop an intervention program, and we wanted to include all these aspects or cognitive aspects in the intervention. And we call this meta-linguistic skills. Like, we want to train children in phonological awareness, morphological awareness, and orthographic awareness, so that the intervention program is addressing the skills that are needed in Chinese. And in this intervention study, we wanted to compare this intervention program or this training in meta-linguistic skills to a training in working memory. And the idea is that we use the exact same material that children use in the training, but presented in a working memory context. So I'll explain this afterwards. So this is an example of the meta-linguistic training. So we did it in Chinese and in English. So in English, we train onset rhyme distinctions and also morphological awareness by creating compound words like football, for example, is in English. And in Chinese, we let children train or learn about using phonetic and semantic radicals. That is shown here. For example, this character, Zong, like the makeup. We explain to them the function of the phonetic radical. In this case, it's on the left side, which is a little bit untypical, and the function of the semantic radical on the right-hand side. The child learned to write the radical separately on the right-hand side, and then also learn to write the entire character. And then there are some examples below that use other characters that use the same semantic radicals, or other characters that use the same phonetic radical that have a similar pronunciation. And then also another aspect that is not illustrated here is that we taught children how they can combine characters to make words like that are comprised of these two characters. Yeah, so this is one example. This is another example of another character. So we had a set of characters that we were teaching the children. And then for the working memory training, so the idea was that we used the exact same stimuli for the training. We also familiarized the children in a similar way, so they learned the meaning, the pronunciation, and to write the character. In this case with this stimulus, and also with another example. And then the actual intervention or training in working memory was composed of different tasks that try to extend their working memory skill or capacity. So we do a memory span task where we present stimuli one by one, and they need to remember them and also try to get a larger number that they can report in a sequence. Or we do an end-back task where they need to detect repetitions. It can be an immediate repetition as shown here with the characters, or a repetition that is two times back, that's shown here with the pictures. And then, so we applied this training material first in a first intervention study with typically developing children. So these are children that do not have dyslexia. The children were in 2nd grade, and the groups were quite small. So, but we kind of assigned them to either a meta-linguistic training group, a working memory training group, or a weighting control group. And we tested their reading skills before training and after training, and also some cognitive or literacy related cognitive skills. So what we wanted to know is kind of whether the interventions are effective and whether one of these intervention programs improves reading more, and also whether the training programs are specific if we look at the cognitive skills. So this is what we found. So both interventions, meta-linguistic and working memory training, improved reading. So in blue is the pre-test, and in green is the post-test. So reading in Chinese increases from pre to post-training in these two intervention groups, but not in the control group. So this is a weighting control group, so they do not receive any training from us in the meantime. And similar results we found for English. So that means both trainings or intervention programs increase reading skills in a similar way. Then when we looked at the cognitive skills, we found that the meta-linguistic group increased their performance in phonological awareness, but not the other two groups. And the working memory training group also increased their working memory skills tendentially more than the other two groups. So that also suggests that these two trainings, while they both increase reading in a similar way, they have a specific effect on their cognitive skills. So that's kind of nice. Was not a nice result. Then we wanted to do, or we did this study with children with dyslexia. So we increased the training duration a bit from 8 weeks to 12 weeks. And originally, we just started with two training groups, a meta-linguistic group and a working memory group. And later on, we also added a weighting control group. We tested their reading skills and cognitive skills, and also EEG, but I'm not going to talk about EEG today. So we also had a group of children who were not dyslexic, and we just tested them once before training. And what we wanted to see, again, is or one thing we wanted to see, are children impaired before training, children with dyslexia? Again, which intervention program improves reading, and then also whether the improvement was an amelioration of deficits or whether it's just compensation. So this is part of the EEG component that I'm not talking about today. So just when we compare them before training, that's what we expect. Of course, if we look at children with dyslexia, then they are poorer in reading. So here it's just the result for Chinese, poorer in reading characters, also slower in reading, and also have some cognitive deficits, orthographic awareness and phonological awareness. And also there was a difference in nonverbal IQ. So this is kind of an expected result. And then we assigned them randomly to one of the two training programs, just stratified by school. And so the first result that I'm reporting from this study is an experiment about speech production. So I mentioned in the beginning that there is a more diversity about the cognitive skills that are important for reading Chinese, but phonological skills are still important. And so here we want to look at the phonological deficits, but in a different way. So usually phonological awareness tasks involve different cognitive skills. So children are asked to delete a phoneme, for example, like if I say the word mouse, and then child needs to repeat it without the M sound in the beginning, so aus. So that's a typical phonological task, but this includes several steps, several processing steps. And another way to kind of identify more precisely where a deficit is can be done with experiments. We can do experiments about language perception or categorical perception, but less experiments have been done about word production. So this is what we did in this study. There are some findings that if people need to produce words, or produce means like just say words aloud, then they are faster if words that are pronounced after each other, if they share some phonological properties, like a shared syllable, for example. So the first study here was done in Dutch. So if people pronounce words like kabel and kalif, then they are faster because there is an overlap between the syllables, compared to when they pronounce words like kabel and poker, which do not share syllables. So this is a finding that is consistent across different languages, and it's also was also found in Chinese at the syllable level, irrespective of the lexical tone. And in our study, we wanted to see, do children show this effect, and are children with dyslexia, do they have a kind of an impairment in this effect? And then also, what does the training do? So this is the experiment that we used. So this, the stimulus, I'm trying to pronounce it now in Cantonese, like something like Fozan and Fogua. So there is a shared syllable in the beginning. So that's where we would expect a facilitation in the second case. And in another case, there is no overlap, like Shubao, maybe. In that case, we do not expect this facilitation. So what we measure is the voice onset time, so how long it takes people to pronounce these words. And then that's what we found. So in general, children with dyslexia, they are slower at pronouncing the words. And they also do not show a difference between the words that show an overlap compared to those that do not have an overlap with other words. But the children without dyslexia, they show this effect that we have also found in adults. So they show this facilitation if there is an overlap of the phonological properties of the word. And then we also compared the children again after training. So here we divided them up according to the meta-linguistic intervention or the working memory intervention. And what we found is that after intervention, those who received the meta-linguistic training, they had developed this facilitation effect that was absent before training. And those with the working memory training, they did not show this facilitation effect. So it seems that this meta-linguistic training can kind of improve this aspect of phonological processing in word production. Yeah, so that's kind of the summary that I just said. Then we also look at reading skills itself, and that's kind of the main goal of the intervention. And unfortunately here, what we found is children get better after intervention compared to before intervention, and they show a similar improvement for the two training programs. But that's not shown here. If we also include the weighting control group, then those children show a similar increase. So the intervention in the children with dyslexia did not lead to a larger increase in reading than what you just expect, like if they're testing 3 months later, because you expect like they get a bit better after 3 months. Yeah, so that means the results of the training with children with dyslexia is a bit mixed. So we have effects on this speech production task, but we don't see the effect on reading itself. And so we think that this might be because they are dyslexic. So maybe they need more time to practice, and like the time that we provided in this intervention study was not enough. But we know from the children without dyslexia that the intervention program itself was effective and also specific for the cognitive skills that we trained. So what we would like to do in the future, so this intervention program was a paper and pencil version. So we would like to move this to a digital version so that it can be applied more easily. Then evaluate it with a more intensive duration. Also, we trained Chinese and English at the same time. So it would also be, I think, important to look at the separate effects. Like, for example, this speech production effect would be good to know. Is this just based on the training in Chinese, or is it the phonological training that children also received in English? Also, it was mentioned before about the subtypes of dyslexia, that children might have more deficits in the phonological area or in the morphological area or orthographic area. So it would also be interesting to look at effects for different subtypes separately. And before I kind of come to a close, I just want to mention 2 studies that we are currently doing and that we are looking for participants. So one study is looking at transmission of dyslexia in families. So we are looking for children with dyslexia at the age P2 and up to P6, who would participate in the study also with the parents or at least one parent, and the tests can be done online. And we are also in another big study that's a twin study, but we also are looking for non-twins. Here we look at the development of reading and math. It also includes a genetic aspect, so we want to look at the heritability or the influence of heritability and environment in the development of reading and math. And here we also are looking now for children at the age of K3 up to P6. So if you're interested to participate, here are the email contact addresses and also QR codes for signing up. Okay, so I want to thank my team, the members of my team who have contributed to this project. Some of them have already moved on to other places like Fang Wang in Stanford, Carrie and Jane at Education University, or Shooting at PolyU. And I also want to thank my collaborators, my other collaborators, Kemi McBride, who has moved away to Purdue, Patrick at BMI, and Kevin, who also gave a talk today. And I want to thank the funding agencies. So the original intervention grant with dyslexia was funded by the Health and Medical Research Fund. Then we had a RTC also supported follow-up project in this study. The Brain and Mind Institute funded the first study, the part with the non-dyslexic children to start with, and also the social science faculty supported us with funding. And I want to thank you for your attention. And yeah, I think now we have time for questions for Kevin and for me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Urs.